purpose?
Permission to question the author of the amendment?
You're recognized. Do you yield, Senator?
Yes, I yield for the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Huffines, I'd like to go through just a few legal areas with you. Again, I think Senator Whitmire made an important point that this is a very serious change that makes a major impact, in our opinion, to the state of Texas. And I know that many of the members have made up their minds. I certainly don't expect anyone to change their mind. But I think because this is critical and I believe will have serious implications, I think it's important to our constituents and to the state that we have a healthy discussion and our eyes are wide open about what we're doing. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the legal issues and ask you some questions about them. What is your definition of reasonable suspicion?
Well, I feel like that the law enforcement will make that call that they do every day, and I'm confident that they'll make the right decision.
Well, certainly you understand that law enforcement has to make that decision every day on the streets, and those have to be determined through objective facts. And later, their decisions will be graded by judges, many levels, at a local level and many times later at appellate level, and certainly all the way up to the Court of Criminal Appeals and even the United States Supreme Court. Just one fact situation. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not asking you what a police officer thinks of what reasonable suspicion is. What do you think reasonable suspicion is? You've used the word quite a bit on this floor. I'd like to know what you think it is.
Well, Senator, I appreciate the question, and it's not what I think. It's really what they would think, and the bill really speaks for itself, and it says you cannot solely stop and question and search an individual because they are carrying their
Well, actually, you should know what it is, because by this amendment, you are trying to tell, and I don't want Senator West's opinion about reasonable suspicion. I want to know what your opinion is. Well, I want to know what, Senator, I want to know what you think.
Repeat the question, what I think reasonable is?
Reasonable suspicion, and how you think it applies, how a police officer will apply that using your amendment that you're putting onto this bill. And Senator West?
Yes, Senator.
Senator Huffines needs to answer these questions.
I'm trying to. I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
I said that I am not a policeman. I am not trained to be a policeman, and I am sure with their training and their knowledge that they will make great decisions.
Well,
they do it.
I wish you meant that, Senator Huffines, because they are out on the street and they do have to make those decisions every day about reasonable suspicion. And the courts have given them very specific direction about what reasonable suspicion is. And they have to be able to articulate, if asked, what they formed, what was the basis of their belief for reasonable suspicion. It's an objective standard. And you are telling them in this amendment that someone with a gun is no longer a factor that they can use solely as an objective standard. And I would submit to you that there are situations where a person, and the sole fact the police officer has is that the person is carrying a weapon, and you are now tying the hands of police officers in specific situations. And it's not going to be in a situation, Senator Hall, where a man is at the Golden Corral with his wife and his children. That's not what we're concerned about, okay? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about police officers on the streets who are protecting us so that we don't have to go out there and try to protect ourselves. Yes, we have a constitutional right to defend ourselves if called upon, but
Order, please. Quiet.
we live in an ordered society. And we have to, you're right, the police officers are trained. The courts tell the police that an officer can conduct a lawful temporary detention when they have reasonable suspicion to believe that an individual is violating the law. Reasonable suspicion exists if the officer has specific articulable facts that, when combined with rational inferences from those facts, would lead him to reasonably conclude that a particular person actually or has been or soon to be engaged in criminal activity. Now, there are going to be situations out there where the simple fact that a person is carrying a weapon will cause the officer in his mind, and it's an objective standard, all right, to believe that the person is about to engage in a criminal activity or soon to or already has recently. But they may not know that the bank has just been robbed, or they may not know. It may be a security officer in a bank, and he sees someone walk in, well-dressed, looks perfectly reasonable, and a customer comes up and says, that man has a gun. Well, under your bill, if the officer had nothing else to articulate about what his suspicions were other than he was in a bank with a gun, then under your bill, the officer could not even you put the words, not even, so we're not talking about arrest here. We're talking about an investigatory stop. Again, Senator West, I'm debating Senator Huffines. I'm not debating you.
I'm not saying anything.
Well, I take issue.
Okay, fine, you take issue, I can stand.
All right. I didn't know that those were the rules of the Senate. Investigatory stop or a temporary detention. So they can't even temporarily detain, and under legal standards, that could be, if you are limiting a person's ability to move on, then that can be a temporary detention. So even in an inquiry by a police officer could be considered a temporary detention. So the language of your bill would prevent police officers from acting even in a situation like that. Again, reasonable suspicion is a standard that has to be met by police officers. They know that. They are trained in that. But they have been trained that a person that they see with a gun, that is reasonable suspicion to them in most instances. And why? Because under current law, under current state law, they would have every right to stop an individual with a gun. Are you familiar with the statutes that are in current state? We'll talk about state law, not federal law. And it's interesting to talk about how this would affect federal law, but that's a whole nother story. But are you familiar with the state statutes that deal with carrying a weapon? That's a question.
Not necessarily. I'm not an attorney, as you know.
Well, I would suggest to you that when you take it upon yourself to take on an issue like this, that you familiarize yourself with the legal penalties associated with these activities. So let's go through the current law as it applies to carrying a weapon in the state of Texas. So I'm sure you know, since you have supported constitutional carry and other bills dealing with guns, that a person commits an offense if he intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly carries on about his or her person a handgun, and it goes on to a legal knife and so forth, but let's just talk about handguns at this time. But certainly you know there are exceptions to that, right? What
Yes.
are the exceptions?
Well, I'm not sure of that.
You don't know? Okay. Well, you can carry a weapon on or about your premises, all right? You can carry a weapon to and from your car to your premises. It's right here in the Law Center, Wes. You want to come look at the statute with me?
Yes. Can I?
Sure, go ahead. You know that you can carry a weapon in your car?
You asked me, do I know if you can carry a weapon
Yeah.
in the car? If it's CHL, you can, yes.
No, I'm not talking. No, okay, let's back up. Let's back
Yes.
up.
Yes.
We're talking about people who do not have a license. We're talking about people.
Excuse me,
Papa-
Senator. I want quiet in the chamber, please. This is an important issue, important amendment, and the senators deserve respect on the floor. If anyone behind the rail continues to talk, I'm going to ask you to be removed.
We're talking about Senator Hall's citizens who he's talking about, people who have a constitutional right under the Second Amendment to freely exercise their rights as it relates to firearms. Talking about my right. I don't have a CHL license. I can keep guns in my home. When I travel to and from Austin, I can carry my gun from my home to my car, drive with it to Austin, bring it up to my apartment. I have every right to do that. I'm not a CHL holder because the law gives me that right. Do you know what the law is as it relates to carrying a weapon in a vehicle?
Well, I know that you can carry it. With a CHL, it certainly...
I'm not talking about a CHL holder right now. But this law would apply to a CHL holder, but it applies to every citizen, every one of your constituents, unless they are otherwise prevented from owning a gun because they had convictions or other exemptions.
My amendment does not change at all where you can carry the gun.
Well, I'm about to ask you a question about that.
Okay.
All right? So, under current law, if you have a handgun in a vehicle, you can have it, but you can't have it in plain view. Okay? How does your amendment affect current law? And I've told you what current law is, and that is any person who does not have a CHL license can carry a weapon if they legally have obtained it, of course. I'm talking about legally obtained weapons. You can't carry it in plain view.
Well, my amendment's very simple. If the reason they're getting stopped is solely because they're carrying a gun, that's not a reason to get stopped. And the police have a lot of discretion. They have a lot of experience in determining what would be reasonable.
I'm asking you a question about carrying a weapon in a vehicle. Your bill states that a police officer cannot question or detain or ask questions about the display, the open display of a handgun. Current law states that you cannot carry a handgun in plain view in a vehicle. And I think let's talk about why that's good public policy. What do you think about a police officer, those DPS troopers who are on dark rural roads, or let's say Highway 71 between Austin and Columbus that many of us drive? Do you know how dark and scary that road is at night? I think many people in this room have been on that road at night. I often wonder, wow, was he a DPS trooper who's pulled over somebody? I think how scary it must be. I guess they get used to it and they're trained, but I think it would be pretty scary to walk up around those cars. And partly I know that because I prosecuted cases where police officers have made those calls and ended up with a bullet between their eyes. I've seen the results of that. So I'm sensitive to it for good reason. So now we're telling those officers that these people can carry their gun in plain view in a car on them, And if you walk up to the car because they've been speeding, which you know you can't arrest someone for speeding, I'm sure you know that, unless they have open warrants or something. And you walk up to the car and you see that they have a handgun, is the police officer under your amendment could not inquire as to whether or not they were legally carrying the gun. They would be violating the law if they didn't have a CHL, because if you're a non-CHL holder, you would have to hide the gun. So is the police officer then not allowed to inquire as to whether or not that person is legally entitled to carry that weapon?
Oh, they could inquire about that.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty sure this amendment's going to go on, so while we're at it, let's set up some good legislative intent here. I don't think that's what your bill says, your amendment says, but maybe we can give a break to the police officers here. So it's your belief that a police officer who stops a vehicle for a traffic violation, whatever it may be, and there's of course numerous, it could be speeding, it could be expired license, it could be expired inspection, and they approach the vehicle to inquire about the traffic violation. It's your legislative intent that if they are openly carrying, that it's okay for the police officers in that situation to inquire as to whether or not they have a CHL license. And you know what, I think usually what police do when they see a gun like that, I think they pretty much tell you to get out the car with your hands up and, you know, lie flat on the ground is probably what they do, because they have to be proactive in those situations. That would certainly go beyond a temporary detention or an investigatory stop. And it would be more of a full detainment in that situation. They may ultimately let them go, but so you're not, you don't feel like a situation like that would be affected by your bill?
No, I do not think that.
Okay, why don't you explain that to me, because I'm curious, because I'd like to know how you come through that thought process to that conclusion, because it really doesn't make a lot of sense based on other things that you've said here on the floor as we debated this bill. So explain to me how that is different than approaching, you know, someone who is, you know, at a bank or something along those lines.
Well, my bill doesn't change the CHL process at all. So if they're pulling someone over, they need to display the CHL license just like they're currently doing. And if they don't, if they have a gun, let's say visible in the car, then they don't have a CHL, they're breaking the law.
So you think it's so it would be okay under your scenario for the police officer to ask in that question if they had a CHL license?
Yes, that is correct. If they're breaking the law when they got pulled over, they have a right to ask if they're carrying and to disarm the individual, to take whatever reasonable precautions they need to take.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about I think there's been some discussion. I know Senator Nichols went through with you this afternoon about his belief, and by many on the floor, that this is just kind of a backdoor to constitutional carry because of the fact that it really, any person would feel that they could just carry a gun without a license because they know the police can't inquire of them if they have a license, because that's what your amendment does. So I think the public policy the public policy concern about this is that many people, I believe, will do this, and it makes it impossible for police to enforce the licensing of CHL holders as they've done successfully and very amicably with CHL license holders for over 20 years. And I continue to hear from police officers who say to us, this has not been a problem. And I haven't heard any CHL license holders tell me that they feel like they've been abused by police or so forth. But I do believe, and you continue to say, and others who have debated this continue to say, that the objective is to protect the law-abiding CHL holder who is simply exercising his or her Second Amendment rights. These are the people that we want to protect, and these are the people who deserve this right. But I think we can all agree that that's an admirable cause, but one of the side effects of doing that is that we are going to have people who cannot qualify for CHLs. We are going to have felons. We are going to have individuals who perhaps have unfortunate mental impairments that would otherwise prevent them from getting a CHL license. We are going to have issues with individuals like that openly carrying without the police being able to investigate that. So with that in mind, I would like to propose something to you, a thought that I perhaps would have about an amendment. Are you familiar now with the current punishment scheme for individuals who unlawfully carry a weapon? Those would be people who don't have a CHL license, who are not carrying on their premises or to and from their premises or legally in a vehicle. Are you familiar with the current punishment scheme under the Texas Penal Code?
Remind me of that, please.
Well, okay. It's a Class A misdemeanor, okay? And unless it's in a premise that sells alcohol, a bar, and then it becomes
Felony.
a third-degree felony. Let me check my fact. I believe that's correct. That's a third-degree felony. Third-degree felony is punishable by 2 to 10 years in prison, okay? And we've done that, we made that a felony because clearly it was the intention of the legislature that they don't want people to carry a gun in a bar. And that makes sense. And we create, the way we set up punishment schemes is we make punishment more severe as we more and more want to deter the behavior. Would you agree with me that it would be important to deter individuals who did not have a valid CHL license or those who would choose to violate the law to be heavily deterred from committing this offense? Because clearly, if you get a bunch of folks out there who are have bad intentions when it comes to carrying a weapon, I think eventually the good people of this state, the good CHL holders, are going to be punished for that. Would you agree that eventually there's going to be public backlash, public push against this whole notion if we start having folks that really shouldn't be openly carrying out there openly carrying weapons? Would you agree with that? That we want to deter that behavior?
No, I don't agree with the first premise, which was this would turn people against open carry.
So what my proposal is, I think that we should raise the punishment. If we're going to say now we're going to let licensed people carry weapons openly, and we're not going to let we're not going to let the police stop and make sure that they are one of the good guys, no matter how temporary. My submission would be then what we should do is make sure that we have a really strict penalty for those who are violating the law. And why? Because the stronger the punishment, the more the deterrence, and that would help to deter those folks from unlawfully carrying a weapon. Does that make sense to you?
I understand your premise, yes.
Yes. So how would you feel about an amendment if I offered up an amendment that said we're now going to raise the punishment for carrying a weapon that's the same as it would be now in liquor establishments, that is a third-degree felony. So now if you carried a weapon, of course it would be outside of the constitutional protected, you know, outside of what the state has protected through statute of your home, going to and from your home, traveling, not in plain view, but otherwise just out on the street, in the supermarket, in the bank, wherever it may be, but you don't have a license. What if we raise that to the same as if it was in a bar, to a third-degree felony? Make all those felonies. Or we could go higher. We could make it a second degree. We could do 20 years in prison. Or we could even go to a first degree. 5 to life.
Well, I don't think that is not. I understand what your thoughts are on it, Senator, I do. But
I'm just trying to protect the public. Yeah. So I'm reaching for ideas here to keep, you know, to tell the bad guys, not our good folks.
It's already against the law, and they already will go to jail, and they will have their day in court, and right now go ahead.
Okay, you just said something. You said right now it's against the law and they will have their day in court. But you see, the problem is that it's difficult now for the police officers to do their job, to find the bad guys who have the guns, to find those unfortunate who have some mental problems that prevent them from having a gun. To talk to the just released felon who was stopped at the corner drug dealer and picked up a .357 and, you know, a crack rock or whatever, or some meth. Because the police officers don't have that option. You know, you are tying the hands of law enforcement. So again, what would you feel about raising the penalty?
Well, Senator, the issue that we're talking about here is really that, first I'm going to disagree with your premise. They can stop somebody that looks suspicious, but they can't just stop them because they're carrying the weapon. I mean, right now you can carry a long gun, right?
Yes.
Can you carry a long gun? You could carry a AK-47, walk down the street, right? And you don't have to have a permit for that. You don't have to, that's not a reason to be stopped. It's perfectly legal to carry a shotgun, walk down the street. There's no permit necessary.
Senator West,
Okay.
your microphone's over here.
Yeah, I'll step up here. But so I understand your premise. But we're talking about here, and what this amendment's about is about exercising the Second Amendment right and exercising the right that you have when you have a CHL license.
And no one is trying to infringe upon anybody's Second Amendment right. No, we're giving them the right in this legislation to openly carry in the state of Texas. No one is infringing upon that right. But the law and the Constitution gives the state authority to regulate this within reasonable means for the safety and security of the citizens of this state and the United States of America. And Texas has always protected Second Amendment rights of individuals. And I'd say Texas is a free state that loves liberty and has a reputation around the world of being a free, independent-minded, strong, I've got people yelling comments here, but strong beliefs in individual rights. But with certain rights come responsibilities, and there has to be some social order. It's just part of the world that we live in. Senator Whitmire and I live in large metropolitan cities. There's many of you, Senator Resty, San Antonio. Senator Hidalgo. What
Kind of big.
Oh, yeah, Senator Hidalgo.
It's getting
What
bigger.
I called. Senator Ellis, your HPD officers are listening. Senator Garcia, you all live in cities, and we have to have order. Senator West, you know what I'm talking about. I know you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking
I know you do. And my point is that you can have rights, but with rights comes some responsibility. And for the life of me, I do not believe that the vast majority of CHL holders in this great state would feel that they were being violated or infringed upon if a police officer politely said, "Sir, ma'am, do you have a CHL license?" They've been doing that for years. It's not going to happen in every situation. It's not. You know that. Everyone in here knows that. I used the example today, Senator Seliger's, he has half of West Texas in his Senate district or more. And, you know, what Joe Bob in the diner and the sheriff knows him with his open gun, he's not going to get stopped. No one's going to ask him anything. But maybe in Senator Ellis's, some of his areas that he represents, some of the areas I represent in a city with police officers who are valiantly trying to do their job, that there are going to be instances when it's in the public's best interest, my constituents' best interest, for them to be able to politely ask someone who is standing there with a gun if they are lawfully, if they have a license. I do not find that offensive, and I submit to you, Senator Huffines, that the vast majority of people who live in this state will not find that offensive. I support Second Amendment rights as much as anyone in this room. I have many guns. My father was a Marine. He joined the Marines when he was 17 years old. The first song I knew was the Marine hymn. Did you know that, Senator Uresti? I was raised with guns. I was raised hunting. I believe in it, but I believe in some social order too, and I believe in supporting our law enforcement. And I understand the votes are here, but I'm not sitting down until I have made my point that this is a mistake. And I think it's a mistake that the state of Texas will come to regret. I know I can't win this fight, but I'm going to stand up and fight it because it's a fight worth fighting for. Stan, it's an unfortunate mix of a coalition here where you have folks doing things for different reasons, and that's fine. Everyone in here has a right to vote their conscience, and I, as much as anyone, respect that. And I respect what's going to happen, but that does not make it right. Thank you, members, for having me. Let me have the opportunity to say what I think, what I know to be the truth. And I ask each one of you to examine your conscience and think about your constituents and what they would want you to do. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President and members.